Oh, good morning, everyone. It's Adrian again. Just continuing all the theme of English language GCSE for students out there. Today, I wanted to look at one of the areas that students find quite difficult to differentiate, and that's the language and structure in GCSE English. It's very important that we know the differences between language and structure because if we don't understand those two elements, you will miss out on maximum marks in certain questions. So it's really important to get a handle of what language and structure is. Now, of course, language is something that students have done for a long time from primary school, as early as year 4, where you look at descriptions and words and you create at the start similes. So, the sun was like a burning ball, or a metaphor where you would use something like moon face. These elements, a lot of children are quite familiar with. But one of the areas that was not really discussed at primary level was structure, and it was probably done in very basic terms, but in the GCSE, it becomes more critically important to understand it. So it's very important that we have a look at what examples of structure can take place. So what I've done is I've looked at an extract that was written in the creative writing paper, and I'm going to kind of go through it and just see if we can pick out elements that are both structural and language, because these papers often do have all these elements in. So if we look at this extract, it's a source that is taken, it takes place in the 1900s, and the actual name of the source, if I remember, is called The Tiredness of Rosabelle. And in this extract, we get a little bit of blurb at the start. So we actually get this bit, which is an addition to the extract. And it says, in this extract from the beginning of short is this extract is from the beginning of a short story by Catherine Mansfield. It is early 1900s, and Rosabelle, a lower class girl who works in a hat shop, is on her way home. So we are given information at the very start about where she is. Now, when we start reading through the text, it's important to know what comes up as something that is as a structural feature or language feature. But at first, we'll just read it, and then I might stop through the reading of it. So at the corner of Oxford Surface, Rosabelle bought a bunch of violets, and that was practically the reason why she had so little tea. For a scone and a boiled egg and a cup of cocoa are not sufficient after a hard day's work in a hat shop. As she swung onto the step of the bus, grabbed her skirt with one hand and clung to the railing with the other, Rosabelle thought she would have sacrificed her soul for a good dinner, something hot and strong and filling. So when we look at elements of this story, this is the beginning. So this is a structural start. So we're looking at the beginning and the setting of the scene. And it's actually, we know that this is at the end of her working day. So perhaps that kind of foreshadows the fact that we might get to know what happened during that day. And we get some elements in this first paragraph of her having a hard day and being very hungry. It says she would have sacrificed her soul for a good dinner, something hot and strong and filling. But it also tells you further back that she bought a bunch of violets, and that was practically the reason why she had so little tea. So already we're building up a picture of Rosabelle's life, that she works hard and obviously doesn't earn that much money. So at the start, of the extract, we're focusing quite a lot on the structural beginning, how it starts, and it starts pretty much at the end of the day, and then we might see what happens or what has happened during the day. So when we're talking about structure, certain words come to mind. So when we see the start of this, we just get the feeling she's tired and she wants to get on, as it says here, a bus home. But in those days, it would be more like a tram, and it would have been very crowded and horrible and whatever. So as we go to the second paragraph, now we're still looking at a structural element here. We look at quite a long paragraph. Now, this second paragraph in the creative writing text tends to be the actual extract that's used for our language question. How does the writer use language in this part of the story? So, but in this part of the story, let's just look at it as a whole with language and structure. So Rosabelle looked out of the windows. The street was blurred and misty. Now, when we start looking at weather references, these can be on two sides. It's a technique known as prophetic fallacy, which sets the mood and the tone. And if the street was blurred and misty, obviously that would give an impression of quite a miserable day, and doesn't exactly, it's not a positive element. What we see next is the writer using yet another kind of structural technique, where she says, but light striking on the panes turn their dullness into opal and silver, and the jeweller's shops seen through this were fairy palaces. Now we've got a lot of language reference there, because the description is very good. Dullness, opal and silver, and the jeweller's shops were seen through this were fairy palaces. Well, the jeweller's shops are not fairy palaces, so we've got metaphor. But the language that is used is building the mood and the tone. And what we get from this is that she's looking out of the window and possibly imagining a better life. So it's about her inward sort of aspiration, and her external reality is that she's got a tough job. And then it goes on to exaggerate her feet were horribly wet, and she knew the bottoms of her skirt and petticoat would be coated with black greasy mud. So it's all very dour and miserable, and there was a sickening smell of warm humanity. Now that's a very strong phrase, and you'd pick that out and you think, well, that's very well described. There was a sickening smell of warm humanity. It kind of gives a kind of a contradiction, something sickening smell and warm humanity. Warm humanity has a couple of meanings. It could literally mean sweaty humanity because they're too warm, and that's where the sickening smell comes from. But it also could mean warm humanity means they might be kind people, all in the same boat, having the same sort of lifestyle. So kind of camaraderie amongst the poor. And it seemed to be oozing out of everybody in the bus, and everybody had the same expression, sitting so still, staring in front of them. Rosabelle stirred suddenly and unfastened two top buttons of the coat. She felt almost stifled. There were half-closed eyes. The whole row of people on the opposite seat seemed to resolve into one meaningless stare. So there's a lot of everybody resolved into a meaningless stare. Again, is a linguistic feature, and therefore it's a language emphasis. But by the end of this paragraph, we know that it's been a tough day and her life is very difficult. So imagine you are a producer of a film, and structure is what the cameraman would be focusing on taking shots. So every time you have a paragraph, imagine it's a different shot with the camera, and that would help you to understand what structure really is. And as we go through, we see more structural features emerging, and in the exams, always structural features everywhere. So we look further into the extract, and it says this: she began to think of all that happened during the day. Well, when you're looking in the past, we're using elements of flashback, and flashback is something that will happen quite a lot. And if we look at some of the other things that, if you look across the screen, when I actually on the ticker banner that's coming across, you've got some of the elements of structure that writers use. So you've got focus, you've got contrast, you've got flashback. We haven't mentioned circular narrative yet, but we'll come back to that at the end. We've got tone, mood, and things like dialogue, and these all come through in this extract, and we'll pick them out as we go along. So she has a look back during the day, and in some ways it slightly looks like she's had a hard day. Would she ever forget that awful woman in the grey Macintosh, or the girl who'd tried on every hat in the shop, and then she said would call in tomorrow and decide definitely. And Rosabelle could not help smiling. So look, there's a slight change of atmosphere. So she's smiling. Why would you smile if you don't like your job? Well, it could show that she enjoys her job, and possibly enjoys her job because she's involved with people, and she's probably a people person. So these are kind of things we start to infer as we read the text. And she is obviously very experienced, because she knows that that lady is like a lot of other ladies who come into the shop, and the excuse was worn so thin. Somebody makes a promise that breaks it. And then there's another shift of focus in the camera, with the cameraman now, and it starts off, but there had been one other girl, and now this is a complete aspiration of possibly what Rosabelle wants for herself. She saw a girl with beautiful red hair and white skin and eyes, the colour of that green ribbon shot with gold they had got from Paris last week. So there's a lot of information coming out about this girl. She's very beautiful, and she is probably somebody Rosabelle would aspire to. And there's a kind of, this is her external reality is her difficult life, but her internal aspiration is that she'd love to be like her, and probably be with the young man who escorts her. And then, so there we have a shift of focus looking at the protagonist, but she's not named. So maybe the beautiful red-haired girl is not as important as we would imagine, but we do know that she's with a young man. But then we get to know what the man is, and the dialogue starts. Now, dialogue is a structural feature, and it adds a lot of volume to a text. So she says, "What is it exactly I want, Harry?" A very strange question. Who would ask what they want? As Rosabelle took the pins out of her hat, untied a veil, and gave her hand mirror. And then we get the dialogue from Harry coming back, and it's quite strange as well. You must have a black hat. So we're beginning to get more and more. So the point about all of these extracts is the more information we get, the greater the change of mood is identified. But structural features come in abundance throughout, and we get different moments throughout the extract which give us ideas about how Rosabelle feels. But I just wanted to go back to a point we made. The story starts with at the end of her working day. So the hat girl Rosabelle is on her way home. That's one thing, but she also is particularly hungry. Now, when we go to the end of the extract, we get two elements of circular narrative that come together, and one of them is I shall go straight home. And in the case of the beautiful redhead girl, obviously the two lives of Rosabelle and this wealthy girl are so different, so it kind of highlights the contrast in their lifestyles. And also the redhead girl is going to go out to lunch with the young man Harry, and obviously at the very start of the extract, we know that Rosabelle was going home and she was very hungry. So, to be honest, that is pretty much what language and structure is. Language is really defined as the descriptive language explaining what things look like and giving us a visual image. Structure is the way the writer puts together information at certain points to build up tension or a storyline. It's often about a narrative perspective as well, where, you know, how is the story told? And it shifts in focus, it shifts in tone and mood, and often there's contrast, which develops and adds, again, a lot of weight to the content that the writer is trying to produce. So again, what I would like to say to you is that, look, if these YouTubes are giving you some ideas about how to approach English, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel, which all you have to do is to subscribe. It will give me an email, but basically it will give you access to all my other tuition videos that I'm building up slowly. I really would again appreciate comments and feedback for this YouTube. Don't be afraid to get in contact with me. I'm learning about how to use this tool as much as anybody else, but I feel if it is something that you feel is of benefit to you, please get in touch and spread the word to other people.